Expansion into Ireland. Callan? No. Lisburn? Yes. From the beginning, the RSHM were not officially classified as a teaching order, nor a nursing order. Guyok preferred the classification mixed order because he wanted us to engage in all the works of zeal. For example, offering protection to women in danger, caring for the sick or teenagers in need, neglected children, young students eager to learn, everyone needing care and the reassurance of God's love. Although his special preference was for the poor, Guyok wanted the RSHM to minister to all the classes of society. Perhaps that is why the convent of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, later referred to as the Mother House, became home to so many different works and different classes of people. The word all was one of Guyok's favorite words. All the works of zeal, all the classes of society. By the 1860s, however, the RSHM needed to expand beyond their ministries in Béziers and to increase their vocations. And there seemed to be no places in France that needed more nuns at that time. By the end of the decade, Guyok and Mère Saint-Jean, now nearing her death, realized that the RSHM would have to look beyond France and be willing to offer what most parishes wanted at that time: schools for Catholic girls and children. The first place they tried was Ireland, since by 1848 there were already 12 Irish RSHM in the community. The pastor in Callan, County Kilkenny, Father O'Keefe, was dedicated to the education of his people and very eager to open a girls' boarding school in his parish. He had heard of the RSHM interest in founding a school in Kilkenny City. So when that plan fell through, Father O'Keefe invited them to Callan. He offered to renovate Callan Lodge at the sisters' expense and have everything readied for the opening of the girls' boarding school and day school before the end of 1868. But then the date for the community's arrival was pushed back to April 1869 and then to July 1869. In the meantime, 10 Irish nuns were packed and ready to go to Callan. They had already spent 600 English pounds to cover the expenses for the renovations, and their suitcases had reached Callan. Only gradually did the community realize that the unreadiness of Callan Lodge was not the reason for the delay. The bishop of the diocese, from the very beginning, absolutely refused to allow Father O'Keefe to open another school in the diocese, a fact that Father O'Keefe never disclosed to Guyok or to the sisters. The feud between the Bishop of Ossory and the pastor of Callan never abated, especially after the priest twice instituted civil action against the bishop in a secular court, an act of disloyalty never heard of at that time. 150 years later, the scandalous event is still remembered yearly by the people in Callan. But Bishop Walsh and those who sided with him continued to implicate the RSHM in O'Keefe's deception, and it was made clear in a letter: the bishop will not on any account receive your community into his diocese, nor would he listen to anything about the French nuns at all. Ironically, most of the sisters who had prepared to go to Callan were not French. They were the young Irish women from the bishop's own diocese of Ossory. Gaillac knew that without the bishop's agreement, the bishop in France would never okay the venture. There were some other attempts to look for locations outside and really on the edge of the Ossory diocese. They looked in Clonmel, Ardfinnan, Ballingarry, then in Claheen, Waterford, and in Dublin, but to no avail. Perhaps it was too close in time to the Callan scandal between the two Irish clerics for the unfairly denounced French nuns to find a welcome in that corner of Ireland. They would return to Ossory 9 years later to a warm welcome in Ferrybank, where the RSHM are still much loved. The following year, Mother St. Thomas was sent to Dublin to continue searching for a place for a new foundation in Ireland. She was contacted by an old friend who was eager to sell his large house in the northern part of Ireland. It was in a town not far from Belfast named Lisburn. Mother St. Thomas agreed to see the house when the owner mentioned that he knew that the good Catholic pastor was eager to settle nuns in the predominantly Protestant town. The offer was genuine. The parish would buy the house for the nuns if they came as teachers, but beyond that, the nuns would have to support themselves. The only problem was that all the bishops of the Catholic Church were gathered at the First Vatican Council in Rome and could not be distracted for requests for permissions. In the meantime, France became involved in the Franco-Prussian War, and the Prussian army was headed down to the south of France. The new General Superior, Mother St. Croix, was terrified that the mother house would be taken over by the Prussians. Some of the French sisters could seek safety in their family homes, but the young Irish sisters would be defenseless unless they could somehow leave the country. When the nuns' urgency finally reached the Irish bishop, he immediately sent his permission for the RSHM to come to Lisburn. And then the 10 nuns who had originally prepared for Callan arrived in Lisburn on a cold night, November 22nd, 1870. After 9 days of travel from Béziers to the north of Ireland, the nuns were finally met by the pastor and driven through Lisburn in open carriages. To the amazement of the poor Catholics who had never seen nuns in habits before, and to the Protestants who wondered what these women were doing in Protestant Lisburn. The pastor dropped them off at their new home, a large, empty house with absolutely no furniture except the kitchen table. No source of heat except a few small chunks of coal. No blankets or beds. No food. A neighbor brought them some small provisions to eat. A Protestant woman came with a few cups, and a man lent them several blankets. According to the annals of the community, on that cold November evening, the sisters took a frugal meal standing and slept clothed side by side on the straw they had spread on the floor. So they were sleeping like spoons. Their poverty was extreme. Within 2.5 months, the sisters opened a paying school for children of all ages in one section of their convent. 30 girls and 12 little boys enrolled immediately. In another section of the convent, a school for poor children was open for 25 to 30 children. By springtime, 6 of the sisters had begun Sunday school for all ages, and a boarding school was slowly taking shape. What would have especially pleased Gaillac were the night classes offered by the sisters 3 times a week for the poor women and girls employed all day in cotton and linen thread mills. There were eventually 80 women at the night school learning how to read, how to write, how to manage their sums. There was time, too, for the catechism and for lessons in knitting and sewing. Gaia came to visit the community in the summer of 1871 and was very positive about what he had heard from the pastor and the people and what he had seen with his own eyes. He wrote to Massaquoi, "Catholics and Protestants, everyone honors and venerates our sisters." He wrote to her again that the religious in Lisburn were well, and their house was very nice and well kept, and repeated that his daughters were appreciated, honored, and loved by the people. But that was not always so. Within a year, on an August afternoon, when some of the Catholics in Lisburn decided to stage a huge demonstration in Belfast, wearing green ties and sashes and waving green banners with "God Save Ireland" on them, declared that Irish political prisoners, now unjustly in prison, should be freed. While the Catholics were in Belfast, radical Protestants, referred to as Orangemen, gathered together in Lisburn, beating on their lamb-begged drums and waiting to attack those returning from Belfast, hitting the men with stones and sticks, and wrecking Catholic homes and breaking their windows. A few months later, it never dawned on the RSHM community on Castle Street that their plan to run a simple bazaar in the town to raise some money for their schools would cause a problem. The first night of the bazaar, menacing groups began to gather, but the constabulary had patrols guarding the convent, the church, and the priest's house. By the second night of the bazaar, Orangemen poured in from the neighboring countryside, and large detachments of police and military had to be sent from neighboring counties to protect the convent and the church. The sister who wrote the annals of the community described the event vividly. How the Orangemen rose up and tried to prevent the success of the bazaar. How they attacked and mistreated people coming to and from the bazaar. How the police had to escort individuals to the train station and form two lines across the street to prevent the crowds from attacking the convent. How the stones were thrown at the convent window, causing the nuns to sleep in rooms that did not face the window. And finally, one of the magistrates ordered a warning to be read, after which the police could fire on the crowd if they did not disperse immediately. The author of the Annals remarks, "The fatigue of the bazaar, or rather the anxiety, was great, with little profit of success." The nuns would have to leave Lisburn in 1920 because of the attacks, continued attacks on the Catholics in Lisburn. But they returned a few months later and stayed on in Lisburn for over 140 years. Some of the schools that they established continue to go on.